Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Q&A portion of your virtual field trip. Tell us where you are, who all is here, how many people in your class, and where you're located. We'd love to know who is joining us today. We're really thankful for everyone who's been active in the chat so far. A lot of great questions have come in, and it's time for us to answer those. So before we get into the questions, I will quickly introduce our panelists. We have director Matt Hames, author Dr. Michael Weber with the University of Texas at Austin and NG, Dr. Kelly Sanders, assistant professor of civil and environmental engineering at the University of Southern California, and film producer Juan Garcia from Disco Learning Media. I will be your moderator. My name is Erin Hardick. I'm the senior researcher and content strategist at ZPrime. So let's start off with some questions for our panelists. We have had some wonderful students at the 6th Grade Leadership Institute from Russell Lee Elementary submit some questions that we're going to answer. So Dr. Weber, I'll start with you. Why did you make this movie when you already had a book on it?
That's a great question. And first of all, hello from Paris, France, where I am right now, 6 hours ahead of Texas and 8 hours ahead of Southern California. This is a global story, so it makes sense for us to participate in the conversation across many time zones. I'd say that the interest in working with Matt and Juan and Professor Sanders and others to make a video or film or documentary about the topic is primarily from the interest of wanting to reach more people. Books are a great way to bring the story together in a comprehensive way, but not everyone reads books. Not everyone has a budget to buy a book. That's not a convenient form for everybody. It takes too many hours to read, this kind of thing. And visuals really are more effective at communicating in many ways, but certainly more effective at communicating to a broader audience. Maybe thousands of people will buy a book and read it, but if people have access to the documentary, then we'll have many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of viewers. So it's really a way to spread the message farther.
Thanks, Dr. Weber. And Matt, how long did the film take to make?
This was one of the quicker documentaries that I've ever made. Documentaries can take 4 or 5 years sometimes, but this one was actually 8 months all told, from soup to nuts, basically. So the first couple of months, I started reading the book to make sure that I liked it and I could make a film out of it. And then I just love the optimism. And then from there, we found some visual sequences, because you kind of taking a book into a film, you have to figure out what's going to be visual. So the aqueduct that Michael visited as a child, I found out there was going to be a light show there, and we decided to go film there with his family. And then the idea of visiting the Paris sewers also, and having this dad take his poor kids on a field trip there, really appealed to me as well. So then we went out and interviewed everyone, and including Kelly, and then we edited it. And so all told, 8 months.
Sewers, wow, that sounds like a fun time. So Dr. Sanders and Dr. Weber, if you could both take a shot at answering this. Dr. Sanders, we'll start with you. What can me and my generation do to help, other than just telling people that they should only think about using less water?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'd just like to say hello to everyone. It's good to see all of you from Southern California. I think one of the best things that we can do is to really arm ourselves with the information. So find out where you're getting your drinking water from, figure out, what's the state of the source? Are you in drought? Are you in flood? Because then you grow for some sort of appreciation for that source. You could develop a relationship with it. Also, try to think about your virtual water footprint. So just like our energy has water embedded in it, your diet has water embedded in it. The things that you wear has water embedded in it. So I think arming yourself with information can make you an ambassador for the water supply, and then you can be a seed that kind of spreads throughout your community with that information. So that's where I would start.
Great comments. If you build on what Dr. Sanders said, if you arm yourself with more information, then there might be more tools available to you once you know to work on conservation and efficiency and looking for less water intensive life choices, different types of materials for your clothes, different foods for your diet, different devices for your home that save water or save energy. And the good news of the way we use energy for water and water for energy is that if you save energy, you save water, whether you meant to or not. And if you save water, you save energy, whether you meant to or not. So there's this cross-cutting co-benefit of mutual conservation. And we can look for even doing that, not just in the appliances in our home, but for the system, to get power plants like wind turbines or solar panels that don't use as much water, or water systems that use gravity or are more efficient and have better membranes for treatment, whatever it is. So arm yourself with the information, as you heard, and then we can take that into action, into next steps and next decisions.
Thank you. And Juan, you were the producer of this film. Why did you decide to make the film about reducing the amount of water consumed instead of other Earth issues?
Yeah, Aaron, thanks. That's a great question. One of the big reasons was actually so that I could work with my co-producer, Beth Hames, and Matt and Dr. Weber in making a documentary like this. That was a big reason we get along. You know, we work really well together, and Alpheus is an amazing storytelling group, and Dr. Weber had written such a fantastic book. So it was an easy choice for me to want to focus on that. Personally, I'm also just interested in science in general. Before I studied film and television production, I actually studied meteorology. So I was very interested in the way the world is working. And another big reason is to piggyback off of what Dr. Sanders and Dr. Weber were saying, which is you've got to arm yourselves with the tools and the information and the resources. And so my company, Disco Learning Media, is actually partnered with KLRN and Itron, CPS Energy, the Paramount, and so many others on creating smart energy education. So you can go to smartenergyeducation.com to learn more about what you can do. And there's resources that are actually connected to the Thirst for Power documentary as well.
Great, that's actually really helpful. Thanks, Juan. So Matt, here's a question for you. Somebody asked how you got all of those amazing shots. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about the actual filming of the documentary, some of the cool experiences you had and trying to get those amazing shots?
Yeah, well, a lot of the credit for that goes to the cinematographer, Brian Nelligan, who just did a fantastic job. But on the same token, when we began talking with Michael and Juan about where we would film and figuring out, first of all, that we were going to be able to film a light show at a Roman aqueduct, you know, you almost can't go wrong with trying to make that look amazing and epic. The Paris sewers also, I mean, Michael was very, very keen on going to the sewers. I think he had already been there before. I'm not sure if he'd taken his kids there before, but that also visually was great. And so when you make a movie like this, you have you know, an opportunity, I think, to make it cinematic and interesting, as opposed to a bunch of talking heads, which would have been a lot easier, and maybe the budget would have been lower, but it would have been a little bit more dry. So I think picking the locations and figuring out where you're going to go and then how you're going to weave that into the story is the first step, and then getting a great cinematographer like Brian.
Thanks, Matt. So we have a few questions in the chat and comments in the chat around mindless consumption, not tracking our water usage. So let's just kind of wrap those up into one. And Kelly and Michael, I'll pose this to you. Why do we not track our consumption? Why is it so much of this mindless consumption when it comes to water and energy?
Dr. Weber, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll go first, and then Professor Sanders can correct any misstatements I make. I would say that there are a couple reasons. One is we have seen access to water and energy as a way to lift people out of poverty as a good thing, and therefore we wanted to improve access. And one way to improve access is to not make it very expensive and to encourage consumption. And we did that for very important policy reasons over the last 150 years, and that has helped lift people out of poverty. But now we're at a point where we have universal access to energy and water for the most part in places like the United States, but not in other parts of the world. And so now that we have universal access, we should be thinking about consuming too much, but we haven't quite made the switch culturally. We have in some places like California, but we haven't everywhere. So there's an opportunity to switch our mindset to only using what we need rather than just using more. That's part of it. The other part is we just sort of like cheap stuff, I guess, is part of it. So we don't really want to track it. We don't want to discourage it. So we have to get to the point where we are measuring what we use and encourage people to use what they need, no more, and putting a price on it. In some places, water is not even charged because we have a feeling that there's a human right to water or energy, and therefore you can't charge for something for which there's a human right. So there's some really good news about why it's good to have it be free early on, but after a while, it gets pretty expensive if you keep consuming it.
I think everything you said was true, but just to add a little bit about the conversation. So at the United States level, it surprises a lot of people that we actually don't know as a nation how much water we track. And some of that is we don't bother to measure it. Water is actually expensive to measure. So even your water bills at your home, often depending on where you live in the United States, is kind of a best guess of your use. So even at your house level, we don't even have a great understanding of how much water you're using minute to minute. And the technologies are changing, they're getting much better. Now we have the technologies where you can get minute by minute water usage, which can really help us become accountable when we start to think about using less. So we're getting better over time, but our better still isn't good enough. As a nation, we still are only making these best estimates every 5 years. So we have a long way to go, but luckily we're moving in the right direction, I would say.
So this is a wonderful question that came in. We can do our personal best to kind of contribute to sustainability, equitable management of water, but there's also this component of legislation and policy that plays a big role. So somebody asked, how much, if any major legislation do you know of taking place at the municipal, state, and federal levels beyond Austin for sustainable, equitable management of water and energy? So Dr. Weber, maybe you can talk about the Austin area or even what's going on in Paris. And then Kelly, if you could talk about what's going on in California, that'd be great. And our other Austin residents on the panel, if you have anything to contribute, we'd love to hear from you as well.
That's a great question. It's a very sophisticated question. We all have a responsibility at a personal level to manage our consumption so we don't consume too much. We all need to be thoughtful about that. But there's also only so much we can do. We can choose what we eat and what we wear and how much we drink and maybe where we live. And maybe we can choose the car if we have the budget or the appliances. But it's hard for us to choose the power plant that's built or the way the city is laid out or the way the power sector is designed. So there's some decisions that are much bigger than one person, and that's where you have government step in and form as a collaboration of individual decision makers through policymakers make those decisions. And if those decisions are not pursuing equitable, sustainable management of the water and energy, then those decisions won't end up with those outcomes. So we have a role or obligation to put our voice in the system and request that and require that of our policymakers. We need to nudge them in that direction. It's not always very easy because the sustainable option might not always be the equitable option if price is an indicator of equity. If the energy is too expensive, then some people won't have access to it, and that's not very equitable. We want everyone to have access to it. So you have to worry about the tension of making sure it's affordable, available, reliable, as well as sustainable. And that's where it gets pretty complicated, and arming yourself with the facts, as Dr. Sanders said earlier, is a great place to start. And then we need to get involved at every level because these decisions are made at the neighborhood, like the city block level, the city level, regional level, state level, and also the national level. In some cases, for carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases, international level. So we need a lot of collaboration, and we all need to be good collaborators to move it forward.
Okay, so I am going to take the opportunity to tackle a couple of great questions in the chat box. So I'm here in Southern California, and we have sort of a strange water situation, and I think it's helpful to understand some of that context. And we also have a few aqueducts. So I'm going to talk about some of the modern approaches to aqueducts. But I live in the city of Los Angeles, and almost 90% of all of the water that I drink has been imported hundreds of miles through 3 major aqueducts. And one of those major aqueducts is actually gravity fed. It actually generates energy as the water flows downhill. It actually spins a turbine and creates electricity. But the reason why my city has to import all of this water is the fact that you have tens of millions of people in Southern California and not a lot of local water resources. So I love this question because California is really concerned about the issue of water scarcity. The other thing that we have is a big agricultural state. So we grow a lot of the nation's fruits and vegetables. So one of the big focuses of California has been to provide accountability for the groundwater that we pull up from underneath the ground. So we get some of our water from lakes and rivers, and we get some of our water from beneath the ground. ground. And so we have something called a sustainable groundwater management plan, where the state is really trying to just get people to start being accountable for the water that they take out of the ground. Because right now, we don't even need to measure it. We don't even need to report it. So that's one thing. And then the second thing I'll talk about is the fact that California is looking at energy and water together, just as this film is. So it's really focused on energy conservation, and it's really focused on water conservation. So one of the things that the state is doing is it's been working with the energy utilities to try to understand how much energy is embedded in our water system, and actually use water conservation as an energy efficiency measure. So I love that, because it's looking at this as really integrated resources. And as Dr. Weber said before, when you save a unit of water, you also save all of the energy embedded in that water. And that is so important in California, when you're using all of these big pumps to pump the water over mountains in the case of the other two aqueducts that aren't gravity fed. So California is sort of a strange case study, but it's really exciting from an energy and water perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Weber. Thank you, Dr. Sanders. Does anybody else have anything to add on that? We are getting close to our time, so we can move on if not. All right, we will move on. I really want to ask this last question, because I think it's important to understand the different roles that you can play kind of in this nexus. Each of you play a very different role around water and energy conservation and sustainability. So we're going to go from Juan to Matt to Dr. Sanders to Dr. Weber, and tell us about the job you do, why you do it, and what role you think it plays in overall water and energy conservation. So Juan, if you could start.
Thanks, Erin. So yeah, I mean, I see the idea again of storytelling, what we've done in the documentary, or also what we're doing with smart energy education and programs like that, and Watt Watchers and resourcefulness, that it really kind of goes back to the core message that Dr. Weber shares in the film, right? Is that each of us has a responsibility and an obligation to really be smart about how we are consuming water and energy, and knowing now that they're so interconnected. You know, that's something that I learned very early on in working with Dr. Weber, and something that always blew my mind, that when you're turning on a light switch, right, you're really tapping into water. And it's something that's really important, that we have to think about all that heated and treated water and what we're doing with it and where it's going. So it really does begin with you. You know, you who are watching this, you can play a very vital, and you can play a very key role in making these decisions, not just now, but moving forward into the future. In fact, we're very, very happy to share that thanks to the San Antonio Area Foundation and Itron and CPS Energy, we're actually going to have a smart energy education scholarship that's going to be available for those students that want to study energy and water resources in either 2-year programs or 4-year programs moving forward. So we'll have more details on the website, but this is one way to get involved. You know, it also goes back to the question about the legislation. Is the way that you can help, the way that you can make an impact, is starting with conservation and being sustainable. But then moving forward, you can also play that role by being somebody who is able to educate others and spread that information far and wide.
Thanks, Juan. And Matt.
Well, I think I'm a naturally curious person. My favorite thing about my job is getting to interview people like Dr. Weber and Dr. Sanders. And that's my favorite thing about my job, is going out and talking to really smart people who may not have all the answers, but who definitely can help satisfy a curiosity about something, and then help to possibly spur other people to be curious. And in terms of what each person can do, I mean, I think that enough has been said in the film. I wouldn't really add to that, but I would say that I think it's interesting to find out in your local area, what are the sources of power that you use. Depending on where you are, you might be plugging into a lot of coal, or you might be plugging into a lot of wind or solar. You might be using a hydroelectric source of energy, or if you're in West Virginia, you know, it might be something totally different. So I think it's just interesting to find out where your electricity is coming from, and then from there do steps to maybe mitigate against dirtier sources of fuel being used, and maybe cut your electricity use, cut your water use, things like that.
And I'll just add on that I'm coming from this from the educational perspective. So I'm trying to arm my students with the information that they need to make better decisions from a personal standpoint, but also to demand more from their policymakers and their utilities and all of the entities that have some role in our water system.
I love hearing all these things. I guess one point I'd like to make is that there's a role for everybody in the world of energy and water. So I play the role of an engineer, professor doing research education, just like Professor Sanders. And Juan and Matt are storytellers making films and compelling visuals and imagery that really help communicate to people. But if you want to be a helicopter pilot, we need helicopter pilots to help build the transmission infrastructure. And if you want to be a sailor, we need boats for floating offshore wind platforms and floating offshore solar. And if you want to be an artist, we need promotional posters and educational posters. And if you want to be a songwriter, people like Woody Guthrie, who wrote This Is Your Land, This Is My Land, he also wrote songs about hydroelectric power in the Pacific Northwest. So no matter what your interests, if you want to be a lawyer, accountant, engineer, artist, you name it, there's a place for you in the world of energy and water. And frankly, we need all hands on deck. So everybody's welcome and should be part of this in the future.
Thank you. So we can squeeze in one more question, but then it's actually time to wrap up. And it's actually a really great question. How would you approach retrofitting / evolving our predominantly fossil fuel powered and highly wasteful nation for the future from the standpoint of regional infrastructure quickly, equitably, and with minimal waste? So Dr. Sanders, Dr. Weber, I'm going to put you two on the spot to answer that. Who wants to go first? Dr. Weber.
Okay, I'll go first. So I think the best thing we can do, if there's one thing we should do, it is we can't allow people to pollute for free anymore. So you have to put a price on pollution. As long as the world can use the atmosphere as a free public dumping ground and dump our waste in the atmosphere, we'll do so. And we need to stop doing that. You can't dump for free in the atmosphere. You have to pay a price to either clean it up or pay for the damages it causes. And by the way, we already do that with solid waste and liquid waste. You can't just dump your sewage in the creek, and you can't just dump your trash over the fence of your yard. We pay people to take it away and deal with it. We need to do the same thing with our gaseous waste in the atmosphere. So if we just say you can't dump your pollution in the atmosphere anymore, or if you do, you pay a fine or pay to clean it up, I think that solves the problem pretty quickly.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of that, you need to get the incentives in the right direction, right? You need to get them in the direction you want to go. And so some of that can be through things like better building codes that incentivize us to save energy and water, clean fuel standards, clean electricity standards. So you want to get kind of the policy infrastructure in place too, to reduce the dumping of pollution into the air and water, and then also to get the actual infrastructure that we're building to incentivize to go in that right direction, I would say.
Well, thank you all. That wraps up our Q&A. I want to thank our panelists for joining us and answering your questions. And I want to thank everybody who submitted questions. We will have a full replay of today's virtual field trip available, emailed to you shortly after this. Again, thank you all for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the screening of the film and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.